everybody. Welcome to the novice meeting of the Houston Astronomical Society. I'm Debbie Moran. I'm the novice chair. Our president, Joe Califf, will be coming in about halfway through. He often hosts these meetings. And what I'd like to mention is we have a wonderful speaker tonight, Bill Spizzirri. But before he does his talk, I would also like everybody to know who's a new member that there are certain things you need to know right this second when you're a new astronomer. And if you don't hear that talk that you need right now, we record these presentations and you can go onto astronomyhouston.org, log in when you're a member. And on the right side, you will see a box that mentions recorded HAS presentations. And there you'll be able to find all of our novice meetings. So if you need to know something about how to buy telescopes or how to set up a telescope, or how to use star maps, all those talks are there. And we do repeat those occasionally, but we know that there are certain types of knowledge you need immediately. We just want to let you know that they are available to you as soon as you join by looking at our recorded presentations, and then it'll eventually come up in the cycle. But tonight we have a fun talk. Every once in a while we punctuate these with just a fun general interest talk. Especially by Bill Spizzirri, who's one of my favorite speakers. He's originally from Chicago, as you'll hear in his voice, and has been an amateur astronomer for over 50 years. And we were very fortunate that he transplanted himself to Houston. He was an officer and past president of a society near Chicago. And here he does a lot of outreach. He's very active in our outreach activities here in Houston, and is a fantastic speaker. So we also like to send him out to schools and senior centers with some great talks. Tonight, Bill is also an avid traveler, and he has a great talk about his visit to the Kennedy Space Center in the 1990s. What Bill is really great at doing is calling ahead and getting sort of insider views, and sometimes getting to go a little bit cut above from what the rest of us can do on the standard tours. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Bill Spizzirri.
Well, thank you, Debbie, and thanks for everyone for showing up. It's going to be my pleasure to do this. I have an awful lot to show you tonight, which you will no doubt see. So I got to go fast, but believe me, you're not going to believe this, but I'm only showing you the highlights. I've spent a lot of time at Kennedy Space Center, and so I'm not even showing you when I saw a space shuttle launch there, because you've all seen those on TV, but a lot of other things, and it goes way beyond the 1990s. So, before the 1990s. So I guess I have to get into share screen. I can do that now, right, Deb?
Correct, and I'll let you know if we see it.
Okay, I hit the share. So, okay, you're going to love this. I hit the share screen button. Oh, for a while there, nothing was happening. Okay, so I hit the share screen. I have the share sound. I hit the share button. And do you see the red letters, Kennedy Space Center?
Yes, we do.
Is it filling the screen?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to start the slideshow. And is it still the red letters filling the screen?
Yes, and we do see your first slide now.
Oh, boy. All right. Everything's works. What a miracle. All right. Okay. I was born in 1950. Yeah, I'm old. And I had a brother who was 6 years older. He was interested in everything about astronomy, space exploration, the manned space program. And so he was my older brother, so he was cool. So I got interested in all that stuff when I was 4 or 5 years old. Okay. So, that's why so in the 1950s, we were already watching them launching the captured German V2s out at White Sands, New Mexico. We were watching the X-15 flights with the pilots like you see there, Neil Armstrong. When, of course, we're watching Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo in the 60s and 70s. We were a space, and that was just the beginning, right? And if you read the newspapers, you heard we landed on the moon a couple of times, right? That probably made the papers here in town, right? And 1972, the last one, Apollo 17, there's a picture of Jack Schmitt. He was walking around on the moon at the same time that Gene Cernan was walking around on the moon. And they get a call up from Mission Control Houston saying, hey, guys, we got some good news for you. Our leader, NASA Administrator James Fletcher, just got the funding from the president, and I assume Congress, for this new project called the Space Shuttle. Now, you see the model there in front of James Fletcher, and, obviously it was a whole different kind of space program, a different kind of vehicle. I got all excited. I got anxious. I got even nervous because I saw, look at that thing. It's like nothing else. It's going to be complicated. It's going to be tricky. So I got kind of space shuttle crazy a long time ago. And of course, they started the development, and the development had a lot of problems. The engines were catching on fire. The tiles were falling off. You see in the lower left-hand corner, a guy sneezed and the tiles fell off. And it wasn't exactly that bad, but it was pretty close. They would fall off if you looked at them sideways. So they had problems, but they continued on. And, oh, by the way, the reason they had tiles is because this was one of the original designs where you had the orbiter on top, and underneath was the giant fuel tank and the booster rockets, and they were both totally reusable, and they were both covered with titanium. And Congress saw how much that was going to cost, and they said, oh, maybe not. And so you end up with the tiles on the space shuttle, but that's all history now, right? So, but the development continued anyway. And of course, in 1977, we had something called the Shuttle OV-101, Orbital Vehicle 101, which NASA was going to call the Constitution. Okay, but if you look in the lower left-hand corner, you see Gene Roddenberry and all the guys from Star Trek. And my brother and I, as well as many thousands of other Star Trek fans, we wrote a letter to NASA, said, doggone it, it shouldn't be called the Constitution, although that's a great name. We should call it the Enterprise, like Star Trek. And NASA relented, and they called it the Enterprise. So we had the Space Shuttle Enterprise, which was not going to ever go into space, but it was going to be used for the atmospheric type of testing. You see it on top of the 747. First, it had that back shell covering the engines, and they got rid of that. And they released the space shuttle so it could glide around in the air. And of course, it was absolutely beautiful and elegant. It landed just perfect every time, or at least it looked that way. Plus, they also used it, as you see on the right-hand side, on the launch pad to do the tests that didn't involve going into space. So that we had the Space Shuttle Enterprise at that point. And of course, you may know this, it has since been moved since the program's all over. And it is now in a museum inside an aircraft carrier, the aircraft carrier Intrepid, sitting on the Hudson River in New York. And you can go, and here it is in this inside the aircraft carrier. So there's the Enterprise. If you want to go visit it, you can come up right up close to it. And that's where the Enterprise is. But anyway, the development continued, but that wasn't good enough for me. I had to have my own space shuttle. So I built this model. It's 18 inches long. I still have it. If you want to see it, come on over. I'll show it to you. It still looks great. Okay. So because I'm space shuttle crazy at this point. And then we get to 1981. Okay. And boy, we know who's going to fly it. There is John Young and Bob Crippen, man, and I remember getting up in the morning and I'm nervous because I'm worried about the space shuttle. There's 47 different things that can go wrong. The very first flight is going to have astronauts on board. They're not going to have an unmanned test flight. So, I'm anxious about it. All right. And then I'm living in Chicago, so I want to learn more about the space shuttle. So I joined an organization called the Chicago Society for Space Studies. We meet at the Adler Planetarium. We got about 200 members. This is a picture of the president, Greg Mariniak, who became very involved in the space program after that. And we would have these meetings, and we would learn an awful lot. The space shuttle and the Cummings space station was the big focus. We had a newsletter called Space Watch, which I was a sometime contributor to, all right? And here you see, I still got my membership card, and notice it says I'm a member and a Space Watch correspondent, which turned out to be important. So then it turned out that if you can see this on the right hand of your screen, I don't know, but my wife and I were going to be on the east coast of Florida in Boca Raton. I don't know if you can see that arrow pointing at Boca Raton. And I said, man, if I'm on the east coast of Florida, I'm going to Kennedy Space Center. I want to get a tour of this place and, learn everything I can because I'm space shuttle crazy at this point. And so I said, but I don't want an ordinary tour. Heaven knows that's for regular folks. So I called them, or I wrote them a letter, probably did both. I said, hey, I belong to the Chicago Society for Space Studies. I better start saying CSSS. Saves a lot more time. We talk about the space shuttle to everybody in Chicago, at our planetarium, to all of our members. Can I get a good tour of the Kennedy Space Center? He said, I'll tell you what, send me information about yourself, about the organization, a couple copies of your newsletter. We'll see what we can do. I sent it to him. He wrote me back. He said, come on down. We'll give you a nice tour. So I was ready. Okay. I mean, you don't want to know something? I'm nervous right now thinking about it. But anyway, so we got in there. Oh, by the way, here's a picture from 1965. It was on the cover of Astronomy in 78, but at the bottom, do you see my cursor going in a circle? Yes, you do. Okay, and there's the Cape right there. That little spit of land is what was called Cape Canaveral, and then later Cape Kennedy, and then it was Cape Canaveral again afterwards. Anyway, so that's the Cape, just so you know what it looks like. And these are what I refer to as my spy photographs. I was in an airplane flying over it, and I said, oh my God, there's Kennedy Space Center. And all these little dots over here are all the launching pads. You know, there's not just the Saturn V launching pads. There's 15 or 20 of them. And this was the pictures I took, who knows when, in the 1980s or something. And my spy photograph. Here's the vehicle assembly building. Here's the launch pads where the Saturn V's and the space shuttle went from, and everything else was on all these other launch pads. Okay. So anyway, we get in our car, we head north to go to Kennedy Space Center. I see this sign on the side of the road, and I knew, because, you know, I was in astronomy, that's exactly where Jupiter was that day. In the east. And so I said, oh, I got to take a picture of this. So I took a picture of Jupiter, but that's actually pointing to the exit ramp to go to Jupiter, Florida, a town. Anyway, we get to Kennedy Space Center. We're supposed to show up at the so-called press site. Okay. So we go to the press site. Oh, by the way, here is another picture. You see all the launch pads, boom, 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 all along the Cape here. Here's the vehicle assembly building. The Saturn V is now located in the museum, but we'll see more of that later. Here's the space shuttle landing strip. This is where the ordinary tourists go over here. Okay, you know, the ordinary people. Anyway, and the river, the Banana River, and okay, so that's what the place looks like. This is sometimes referred to this as the Air Force section over here. Here's a photograph. I did not take this, but you can see the so-called Air Force section, many, many launch pads. And by the way, if you're just an ordinary tourist, they don't let you take a lot of pictures in the Air Force section. You got to have a special permission to do that. But we didn't have any problem with that. Anyway, so I show up at the press site and they hand me this press badge because, as it states there, I'm in the news media. Okay, which sort of surprised me. But there you go. I'm in the news media. And as you can see the date, March 20th, 1981. And if you happen to know it, that's approximately 3 weeks before the first space shuttle launch, Space Shuttle Columbia, which was in April, second week of April in 81. So I get this badge, and then they introduce me to a NASA engineer who's going to be our tour guide. And it's for me, my wife, and a reporter from a Wisconsin newspaper. He's going to take us on a tour. And they introduced me to this nice engineer. I guess he probably lost a bet or something. And so he had to take the tourists on their tour. And I asked him, I said, what are we going to be able to see today? And he said, we can go wherever you want to go. What do you want to see? I'll take you wherever you want to go. And when he said that, I'm not kidding, my knees got weak. Okay, because I'm all hepped up about this, but being able to see everything, I said, okay, I want to go sit in the space shuttle. And he said, well, we can't do that, but I can take you just about every place else. So I said, fine, you lead the way. We'll just go with you, whatever you think is a good idea. I didn't know what else to ask him. So he says, I'll tell you what, we'll do it chronologically. We'll start with the Mercury program. We're going to go in the area for the Mercury missions, okay? And the first thing he showed me is this monument, which I didn't even know existed. And maybe, and I know many of you have seen Kennedy Space Center. I wouldn't be at all surprised if almost all of you have been there at one time or another. You've certainly seen it on TV. And I hope to show you stuff that maybe you didn't get a chance to see. I should have said that before. But anyway, so this is this monument to the Mercury program. The 7 has to do with the first 7 Mercury astronauts. Every one of their spacecraft, their space capsules always had the number 7 associated with it. Friendship 7 and Freedom 7, etc. And of course, the rest of this monument, that image, is the there's a symbol for each of the planets, right? And this is the symbol for Mercury. Why? I don't know. I should have looked that up so I could tell you, but I don't know. So they show the symbol for Mercury and the number 7. And underneath there is a time capsule that was buried in 1964, not to be opened for 500 years. So eat right and exercise so you can be around and see what the heck they put in the time capsule. As far as I don't know what's in there. So he showed us that. And then he took us to Launch Complex 5 and 6. And this is where the Mercury program, the first manned missions, took off from. Of course, Alan Shepard, who took off, by the way, on May 5th, 1961, exactly 61 years ago today. Thanks, Debbie, for scheduling this perfectly. Okay. And that's where Gus Grissom took off from. And there is my lovely assistant, Diane, also my wife, standing next to it for scale. That's a Redstone rocket, just like the one that Shepard and Grissom flew on. Of course, they had the 15-minute flights, so-called suborbital flights, right? But it was man, did this rocket look big on TV? It looked like it was the biggest thing ever, and it's 83 feet tall. I mean, some of you have backyards we could fit this into, okay? And it was largely modeled after German V2s, but it worked, all right? And thanks to von Braun's guidance and leadership. But anyway, so we went to that launch pad, and there you can see the capsule up at the top. I don't know if this rocket is still in that. Oh, by the way, this is 1981. So, I don't know how much of this stuff is still there. But anyway, so the little capsule there, all the Mercury launches were for one astronaut at a time. All right, that's what that looked like. And there is the reporter from Wisconsin took a picture. There you see the whole rocket and my wife next to it. And that's what the whole rocket looks like. And then only those first 2 launches were on the Mercury Redstone rocket. After that, all the Mercury launches were on the Atlas rocket, okay? So we went from the Redstone, we went over to this launch pad, which is Launch Complex 14, and this is where John Glenn in February 20th, 1962, went on the first American orbital flight, right, in an Atlas rocket. Now, the launch pad is all the way on the left over here, and this is a ramp that they had to roll the rocket up to get to the launch pad, okay? And here's another view of the ramp. Abandoned in place, I believe, is NASA parlance for we're not going to use this anymore, but we ain't taking it down because it's a historic place. And you'll see that again later. This is what it looked like when they were launching Atlas rockets off of it, all the gantries, and you see the big, beautiful silver Atlas, and you can see how close we are to the ocean and all the paraphernalia. And on the bottom, that ramp, that's how the rocket got up there, and that's what we were looking at a minute ago. And they have an actual Atlas rocket you could walk right up to, 3 big engines. And on that ramp, they have this memorial. It's not crooked. I took the picture crooked, and it just talks about this is where John Glenn took off in 1962, et cetera, et cetera. And then this is where all the other Mercury Atlas launches came from also, ending with Gordon Cooper in 1963. So they have this, as far as I know, that's still there. And then, of course, after Mercury comes Gemini. Gemini MEDS because there were 2 guys up in the capsule. And they had this sign up there which listed all the Gemini flights in 65 and 66. It was looking a little worse for wear already in 1981. By the way, this sign is no longer there. They have one like it, but it's in much better condition right now, okay? So it's not leaking the way this one was. Now we're on the launch pad for Gemini. There's not much there at the Gemini launch pad anymore. What you see is this dome over here. That's launch control, kind of a blockhouse, if you will, where they would, control the launch of the Gemini flights right from the launch pad. This is just a shield to protect the good, hardworking people in launch control in case there is, an issue at the launch pad, and they don't want the people in launch control to be at risk. And so now here is the Gemini launch pad. Again, there's not much there. and Titan II was the kind of rockets that all the Gemini missions used. And this is the so-called flame trench. So the rocket would be sitting right over here, and when they hit the button and the engines light and all the flame and the thrust comes out of this opening and goes right down this trench to guide it away from launch control and everything like that. They wanted to be in control of the situation. As you can see by the weeds growing in it, nothing has been happening at the Gemini launch pads, at least even as early as 1981. And this is what the Gemini launch pad looked like when they were in business. Okay, interesting. The gantry didn't slide away as in some launches; it just tilted away, and then the Titan II rocket would take off. But in the lower right, you can see that launch control bunker. And there wasn't much of this there when I visited. And then, of course, after Gemini came Apollo. So the first place he took us was to this launch pad. And it's called 34B. And as you may recall, it was the site for Apollo 1, where during a countdown test, there was a fire in the capsule and the 3 astronauts perished. Grissom, Chaffee, and White in maybe a minute or less, a minute or more, I should say, from the fire in the capsule. But the launch pad is still here. If you look on the left, it also says abandoned in place. They're not going to take that away. But it was subsequently used for all of the other Apollo unmanned launches. They would do some tests of unmanned vehicles when they wanted to just try out the Saturn 1B to see how it worked. They would launch it from here. And so we got to go to that launch pad. That's the 2 people there, the engineer and my wife. In the background, you can see the flame deflectors that were used for the Saturn 1B rockets. They didn't have a flame trench as with the Gemini. Those flame deflectors would have been underneath the launch pads to direct the thrust in directions. Here's another view, from right behind the flame deflectors, or big metal things. Here's another view of the launch pad. And there's another view from the other side. And then, of course, I had to go under it, and I'm legally obliged to take this picture looking up at where the rocket would be sitting. And this is just a leftover support for the ramp to get the rocket up to the top of the launch pad. And just by pure chance, I didn't even know this until later, that's the Space Shuttle Columbia on the pad in the distance. So you can see the Apollo launch pads are way along that so-called Air Force station, a long way from the big launch pads. And here's another view. I didn't take this picture, but you can see the pad, you can see the support, you can see the flame deflectors, et cetera, et cetera. That's about all there is at that pad. And then when we were at the launch pad, I'm thinking, wow, this is historic. I'll never come back here again. Wouldn't it be great if I could have a souvenir? And so I saw this bolt in the launch pad, and I asked the engineer, I said, gee, would it be okay if I took this bolt out of the launch pad? And he said, well, they kind of frown on you taking pieces of it away. But he said, there's something I have to look at in the other direction right now. So he turned around and faced the other direction, and I took the bolt, and I have it still. It's about 3-4 inches long. And I have used it in many, many, many presentations in the past about, how iron comes from stars and things like that. And so I didn't get in trouble or anything, but I got to go to attorney anyway, so I don't think they're going to do anything. So that was my souvenir. Then we went, still in the Apollo theme, to see the Saturn V. Now, many of you might have seen Saturn V's before. In 1981, they had this one right next to the vehicle assembly building on the left, and it was outside. And even in 1981, it was a little worse for wear. It was in the Florida heat and rain and whatever else, sunlight, 24 all the time. You can see my lovely assistant there standing next to it for scale. And you look at that, I think that bus, which is a little farther away, I think it could still drive right into one of those engine cones. That's how big those things were. By the way, the reason they had an extra Saturn V here in the 1980s was because Apollo 17 wasn't supposed to be the last landing on the moon. They had already scheduled 18, 19, and 20. But I spent some time as a tour guide at the Johnson Space Center as a volunteer, and I got to meet a lot of old timers from NASA. A lot of great stories, and they told me that they were really happy that in all 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and 17, they never lost a crew in space. And they were really happy about this, as well as many other people, right? And so when NASA and people were kind of losing interest in the Apollo moon landings, and when NASA decided to cancel those last three, a lot of NASA people were very, very happy. They loved the program, but they said we didn't want to push our luck. And the fact that we brought everybody back alive was a good thing. And so we ended up with 3 Saturn V's that were already built, and now one's at Kennedy, one's in Houston, and the other one is at Huntsville, Alabama, which you can go see. And here is yours truly taking my obligatory picture by the bottom of the Saturn V. And there's the second stage, which also had 5 engines. By the way, the fuel in the second stage was different than the fuel in the first stage. The main fuel in the first stage was kerosene. The second stage was hydrogen. It's the little Saturn V trivia. And then here's the third stage with 1 engine. And here's the business end with the command module, the escape tower, the service module, and then this big white part here is where they would store the lunar module, the lunar lander, you know. And so this was the business end of the Saturn V. And at Kennedy Space Center, it's no longer outside. They built this incredible museum. I mean, we have a Saturn V that's indoors here, but the museum at Kennedy is amazing. It's not just the Saturn V, which, by the way, is all painted up and looks like it's brand new, but they have many, many other exhibits. If you want to go to a nice space museum, they got one there, that's for sure. It's a beautiful place. And here's something, boy, what an exciting photo, right? This is the lunar rover test track. And I knew I'd never get back to there, so I took a picture. It's just a bumpy piece of ground, and they would drive it around back and forth to test it out, to figure out how to make sure the wheels roll and all that kind of stuff. And then we go to the space shuttle. Here's space shuttle related stuff. First of all, the vehicle assembly building. We could not go in it that day, but I went into it another day, and I'll show you that later. And then, of course, the engineer told us, see the flag on the side? It's 50 feet high, and it takes 800 gallons of paint to paint the flag. Well, how could I argue with them? I suppose it's true. It's a huge building. You're going to see more of that later. Matter of fact, on the right, you see those 2 big black things. Those are the engines for the Saturn V. That's where the Saturn V was located outdoors. And this is not when I went there, but I love this picture of the vehicle assembly building. And that space shuttle in the parking lot is all made out of NASA employees, as well as the ring that goes around it. And I love the picture so much, I had to include it. Okay, they'll probably never do that again, that's for sure. We also went into launch control at Kennedy Space Center. We got to go inside there, and that was really nice. And you know, a bunch of screens and dial telephones and stuff like that. And this is the view when you're in launch control, looking towards the 2 launch pads. You see this one over here on the right and the one on the left. So this is the view they get of a launch from launch control at Kennedy. And this is not a picture I took, but you can see since there's, I think it's 3.4 miles away from the launch pad, this is what they see when a launch goes up, just to give you an idea. Nice big windows. Oh, and then they have the rocket garden. All kinds of rockets, and you can walk right up to them. Great picture opportunities. I believe now those and that's where they were in 1981. I believe they have them all now by the front entrance, which makes a great display at the front entrance, right? They moved them, which probably wasn't very easy. Anyway, now the next thing he took me to was the space shuttle simulator. Now, obviously, it's only a small part of the orbiter, and it's facing up as it would on the launch pad. And the big white box next to it is the white room, the room that the astronauts and the engineers are in when they want to get through the hatch, go through the hatch of the space shuttle. And the reason they did this is so when the commander and the pilot are in on the flight deck in their space suits with space helmets and strapped into the seats, if there's an emergency on the pad, They've got to practice on a lot until they can get out of their straps, get off the flight deck, and get out of the orbiter within 60 seconds. So they had to practice it over and over and over. So we went up some stairs on the left, which are out of the picture. We went into the white room. And so we're in the white room now, looking at that round hatch that was on the side of the space shuttle. And so I crawled in through the hatch, and now I'm on the mid deck. You can see my lovely assistant outside in the white room over there. And now I have to climb from the mid deck up to the flight deck where the pilot, where the commander and the pilot sit. So I'm in the pilot seat now. There's the commander's seat. And then I move over to the commander's seat, which I was a little giddy about. That was pretty cool. And looking towards the pilot's seat, and you can see their joysticks, all the dials and switches are all painted on. Again, the purpose of this is just so that they can figure out how to get out of there within 60 seconds. They got to climb down to the mid deck and climb out through the hatch and et cetera. So as you saw before, they put the space shuttle on a plane sometimes, right? For several reasons. And you can't just say, hey, excuse me, hand me that space shuttle, would you? It's not easy getting a space shuttle on top of a 747. So they had to invent this thing called the mate-demate device. And it's a big tower. It's hard to tell how big it is here, but you'll see in a second. And the yellow thing is the crane that would lift up the space shuttle, right, to put it on the 747 or to take it off of the 747. And then these two walkways are for engineers to do their work alongside the space shuttle. Here's another view. So you can see the crane, you can see the walkways for the people, and then you can see how the middle is cut out for the nose of the 747. So this is how at Kennedy Space Center and at in California at the place where they landed in California, the name escapes me right now.
Edwards.
Edwards Air Force Base. Thank you very much, whoever said that. They have one of these. Excuse me, they had one of these. And that's how they would put it on and off of a 747. And here's a view, again, not my picture, but how they would give you an idea of how they would do that. The 747 moves in between those two towers, and then they pick the space shuttle up and down. And that's just the way NASA does things, right? Now you see the dates, 76 to 2014. In 2014, you know, the last shuttle mission was 2011. In 2014, they knew they weren't going to be putting space shuttles on top of planes anymore. And so this has been completely demolished at both locations. And so it doesn't exist anymore. And right next to the vehicle assembly building, and these are all the places that the engineer is taking us. Right next to the vehicle assembly building are the so-called orbital processing facilities, those two small buildings on the right. And you can see the big black doors accommodate the delta wings of the orbiter, and the black vertical part here accommodates the so-called vertical stabilizer of the orbiter, and so the orbiter can drive right in, so to speak. And this is how they get the orbiter in. They tow it with a tow truck, a little yellow tow truck there, just like they sometimes do airplanes at the airport. This one is being towed from the landing strip to the orbiter processing facility. And this is what it looks like when it's inside. On the left, you can see it's inside the OPF, as NASA would call it. And on the right, you can see, you know, how it just drives right in. And so that's where they would, you know, fix the tiles, put air in the tires, I guess, clean the windshield after a flight, get it ready for the next flight, et cetera, et cetera. And and as you might have seen on the screen before, there were two of them when we went, but when the space shuttle really got going in the 90s, they built a third one right next to it. Now, as you all know, when the space shuttle went up, it had the two solid rocket boosters on the side, SRBs, and after, what was it, 2, 3, 4 minutes, they would be out of fuel and they would be ejected and then fall in the ocean. And they had to be retrieved. And so these are the two ships, the Freedom and the Liberty, that would go out as far as 200 miles out and get the SRBs and tow them back to KSC. They would go up next to the SRB. They would tie it so it would be strapped up against the side of the ship. And then they would bring it right up to where the ships are right now. And then this area here, if you can see my cursor, is a slip of, you know, that was open to the ocean. And so the SRB, they would tie some lines onto it and drag it right into this slip. Okay. And then, oh, this is just a close-up view of the ships. So that's me and the engineer and the reporter. And you can see the names Freedom and Liberty. Okay. I wonder what those ships are doing now. I do not know. Anyway, so the SRB goes into the slip. It's floating in the slip. And then this kind of crane with the four wheels would be able to go right over the slip on both, the wheels go on both sides of the slip. The yellow crane would come down, attach to the SRB, pick it up, take it out of the water, and then they would take it over to the side. You see there's a second crane over here, two SRBs, two cranes. And then these two gray doors is where each of the SRBs would be loaded in, and they'd be dried off and cleaned up and get ready to go back to the factory in Utah where they put the fuel into the SRB because they would be reused again, okay? And so you might ask yourself, I asked myself this question, so what determines the width of an SRB? And again, I had spent a lot of time with these old NASA people at Johnson Space Center when I was a volunteer, and they told me this story, and I've heard it in other places too. I cannot attest to this, but here's what everybody tells me. The size of the SRB is determined this way. First of all, it has to fit on the train car to make it out to Utah. And train cars are all the same size. The railroad tracks in America are all 4 feet, 8.5 inches apart, okay? The train tracks in America were based on the train tracks in England. The train tracks in England were based on the size of the Roman roads that had been in England for a couple thousand years, I suppose. And the Roman roads were the size of the Roman roads were based on the size of the Roman chariots. And the size of the Roman chariots, that is the distance between the two wheels and the chariot itself, was based on the width of two horses' behinds. Okay? They had to fit on the chariot, and they had to, the wheels were the proper size for that. And so the space shuttle of the future solid rocket boosters were based on the size of horses' behinds. Okay. Again, I can't claim, I don't know that that's the thinking, but that made sense to me. So that's where they fixed up the SRBs. And then he took us to the space shuttle landing strip. And he tells us it's 17,000 feet long. And I went, oh, come on, that's over 3 miles. How can you build 300 feet across? How can you build 3 miles of concrete? And so I looked on Google Maps and I measured it myself. And yeah, it's over 3 miles long. Anyway, we got to go walk on it. As you can see, my lovely assistant there. And as you can see, the bus on the side, that's for the ordinary tourists. And they don't even get to go out and walk on it. They just looked at it through the window of the bus. But we got to go walk on the doggone thing, and I wish somebody would have taken my picture on it, but nobody did. But anyway, I assumed it was going to be just a really nice, flat, super, super smooth piece of concrete. That turned out not to be true. Here you can see the lines coming from the camera here towards the space shuttle, right? Those grooves were put in the entire length of the landing strip, as it says at the top there, to drain the water away. And, they don't want the space shuttle to be slipping. And also to increase the coefficient of friction. In other words, to help the space shuttle orbiter slow down, right, when it lands. It turns out, though, that they made it too rough. And you can see the lines that are going left to right. That's because in 1981, when I was walking on it, each one of these flat grooves, these flat pieces here between the grooves wasn't flat. They were pointed like a triangle. And let me tell you, it was really very annoying to walk on them. You were walking on triangular pieces of concrete, and you can do it. It didn't really hurt, but it was not the perfect walking surface. And so after a couple space shuttle landings, they saw that very rough surface was really hurting the space shuttle tires. So they cut it down, and that's what causes the grooves you see going left to right. That's the way it is now. When we were on it, it was pointy, and so we got to walk around on it. That was a nice, fun thing to do. And of course, I love the landings on the landing strip. The landings, I love them better than the launch. They were so beautiful, so elegant. The nose wheel was on the center line of the runway every time. They were great to watch. And then he took us over to the crawlers, which many of you probably know about. We have two of these giant machines. This is what moves the Saturn V and the space shuttle, and now the SLS rocket, from the vehicle assembly building to those two big launch pads. We got two of them. They're called crawler transporters. In the 1990s, they named them Hans and Franz because they were made in Germany. And that was a joke about a Saturday Night Live skit from the 90s you might know about. Maximum speed 3 miles an hour, designed by Rockwell, but put together in Germany. And then these giant things had to be transported from Germany to a KSC, and they did that on a boat, and that crosses the Atlantic, and the Atlantic's full of salt water, and the salt water really damaged them on the way, and so they had to be cleaned up and fixed and refurbished and whatever. But they did that. And I mean, these things got here in 1965, and they're still using them today. Right now, as we speak, the SLS vehicle with the Orion capsule is sitting was moved by one of these. So from 65 till today, they're fantastic. But the rocket doesn't sit right on the crawler. It sits on a mobile launch pad, which sits on the crawler. I'll show you that in a little while. And the crawler has these 2 giant treads at each corner, 4 diesel generators, 6,000 horsepower total, 16 electric motors at each corner, so that the treads actually run on electricity, and the diesel generators just generate the electricity. It weighs 6 million pounds, like everything else at Kennedy. It's just huge, right? And you can see the people next to it on the left, my wife and the engineer. Here's another view. This is where the pilot sits in this cabin to drive it. Although while he's driving it, there's easily 30 people in a circle all around it, watching every single thing on it, right? And there's another cabin like this in the other direction. You can't turn these around as such. When you want to go back from the pad to the VAB, the pilot has to get in the other cabin, and so he could point toward the other direction. So it's just big. And as you can see here, the people on the right, you can walk right under it without bending down. It's huge. Okay, what else can I say? But you can see how the 2 treads on each side are on the road. There's no road in the middle. It never goes in the middle. And that road's a gravel road. And there's my engineer friend there poking his head. I don't know what he saw inside there, but he just wanted to get a closer look. And you can see how big the treads are on the tractor treads, how big each link is here. Each link is 2,000 pounds, and I have no idea how many there are. There's a whole bunch of them. So as you can see, my wife there, she could easily walk underneath it. There's plenty of headroom. And of course, I couldn't resist. I had to do the same thing. I walked underneath it to see what it looks like underneath. And there's not much, a bunch of structural iron, and you see pipes and things. And of course, with the diesel generators, they're really, really loud when you got 6,000 horsepower. So they have these mufflers on them, just like on your car, more or less, except the mufflers were 5 feet by 10 feet. It's like everything else at Kennedy. It's huge, right? So that's the crawler. Oh, and they have inside the vehicle assembly building, which I eventually was able to go into. They had this great model, and you can see the orange generators and the blue electric motors and the yellow treads and all this. It's the way it's constructed. And then this is the mobile launch pad, which sits on top of the crawler. It has those 6 legs that are telescoping, so the mobile launch pad can go up. The crawler slides underneath, if you will, and then the mobile launch pad telescoping legs come down, and it sits on the crawler. And then you put hand me that Saturn V, please, and you put it on top of the mobile launch pad, and then you take it out to the launch pad 39. And so we got to go see, and those 2 big gray things on top, that's because now the mobile launch pad is set up for the space shuttle. Those were needed for the space shuttle, I think, for the SRBs. Anyway, so that's the mobile launch pad. And this is what the whole shebang, as they say, looks like. All of a sudden, the crawler looks small, okay, compared to the mobile launch pad of the space shuttle. As you can see, the mobile launch pad sticks out on all 4 sides from the crawler. It's absolutely huge. But, if you're launching a Saturn V, that's what you need. And this is a picture I took when I was right underneath it when it was moving down the road, which I'll show you a video of later if you're still awake. I know there's a lot of stuff here. I hope you can stay awake. So it's going down the road. I was right underneath it, and I'll show you a video of that later. And as you can see, the guys, it's easy to walk with it. It moves at a half a mile an hour most of the time, and it's easy to walk with it. And there's the gravel road, and you can see the tracks of the treads in the gravel road. And so it takes it to the launch pad, the launch pad lifts up, the crawler slides out, the launch pad comes back down with the space shuttle or Saturn V on it, and that's how it gets to the launch pad 39. And then it was a big crawler road, so I took my souvenir. I took 3 pebbles from the crawler road. That's my souvenir. 3 pebbles. Okay, didn't cost a lot. So then this is a picture I took from the launch control, right, which is right next to the vehicle assembly building. So this is what 3.4 miles away. This is what the view of the launch pad is from the launch control. And I asked the engineer, I said, boy, that's really nice. We can see it nice, but is there any chance we could get any closer? And he said, yeah, sure, let's go. So we got in his car and we got a lot closer. Nobody gets to do this anymore. And we went right up to the launch pad. And you might think, oh, gee, this is a security problem. Look at this, it's just an open gate. But it was completely secure because they had a stop sign. Well, clearly, nobody is going to go past the stop sign, right? So neither did we. And I'll explain later why I think we couldn't get any closer to the launch pad, but we'll get into that later. So we got to go this close, and the so-called, oh, that's me. I had to take my obligatory photo with the space shuttle there. Oh, yeah, and the white lightning rod on top of the gantry, taller than John Glenn's Atlas rocket. That's what they always tell you on the tour. And then I took some close-up pictures. And you can see the external tank and the SRBs, and it was nice sitting on the mobile launch pad. And of course, this big square thing is the so-called rotating service structure. It's hinged on the left-hand side, so when you get close to launch time, this whole thing swings over to the left, and then, it's not in the way during the launch. And then I told the engineer, I said, this is great, but, is there any way we can get a better view? And he said, yeah, sure. We can go on the other side of it. So he says, but there's a problem. To get to the other side, you have to crawl through this jungle and swamp, which, Florida has a lot of, right? And I said, hey, I got an old pair of shoes on. I got no problem. Let's go. So he took us up to the area where you enter the swamp, and I looked at that. I mean, it looks like you can hardly walk through it, but well, we managed. And he showed me the sign. He said, listen, it's not without its dangers. I said, that's okay. I had came this far. I'm going to go. Notice I had my my press badge on my jacket. He said, listen, there are guards in camouflage around the launch pad, and they're armed. If you see one, show him your press badge immediately so he doesn't kill you. He got my attention that way, right? So I said, fine, I got the message. I walked into the jungle. Shortly after that, I see the guy in the camouflage. He has a big automatic weapon in front of him, and I show him my badge, and he just nods yes, and he disappears back into the jungle. And so I went on my way through the jungle, and I finally get to, and this is all pictures I have taken. There is plenty of wildlife down there. Okay, that's not the only alligator I've seen. You're walking down the sidewalk and there's an alligator right next to you. I mean, and the wild boar and that snapping turtle, that'll bite your finger off, baby. And so there is wildlife. He wasn't just, trying to scare me. So I walked through the jungle, and then we get to this area on the other side of the space shuttle, which is much nicer than the swamp. And we get to a little bit better view. Okay. And so you can see the external tank, you can see the SRBs, and if you look closely, you can see the delta wingtip of the Space Shuttle Columbia orbiter. Okay, so we got a lot closer. That was really, really nice. Took some nice pictures. Now, the reason we couldn't get close to the launch pad, I think, is this, and I didn't know this until after we went home that evening. The day before, remember, I was there on March 20th. On the 19th, they did a countdown test, and the countdown test went great. This was a countdown test where they did not fuel this space shuttle. Sometimes they fueled it, and then afterwards they would have to take the fuel out. This time they did not. Now, when they have a countdown test where they fuel it, after they take the fuel out, they flood this area back here by the engines with nitrogen to get rid of all the dangerous fumes right, from the fuel, because the fuel, there's some pretty nasty stuff back there. This time they didn't fuel it, so they didn't have to do the nitrogen, but the engineer said, you know what, since we're done with the test and everything went great, could we just this time do the nitrogen thing, flood the compartment with nitrogen? And they said, yeah, sure, that's a good idea. We'll test it out. So they did that. Unfortunately, you see those engineers over there, they worked down in that compartment and they didn't tell those engineers. So they opened up the compartment because that was their job. And the engineer walked in that compartment and he immediately keeled over because of lack of oxygen. The compartment's filled with nitrogen. His friend, another engineer, sees that. What does he do? He goes in there to go help his partner who just collapsed, not knowing why. What does he do? He immediately collapses because of lack of oxygen. A third engineer does the same thing. Three of them are now laying in this aft compartment for the same reason. The fourth engineer said, I'm not going in there. They eventually, cleared out the nitrogen, got the guys out. Unfortunately, one of them died that day, either on the way to the hospital or at the hospital. The next one died in just a few days, a day or two or something like that. And the third one died a couple of years later from complications from that event. And that all happened the day before we went on the tour. I didn't even know that I knew that we did a test. I didn't know about the problem. And so these fellows are memorialized in the Spacewalk Hall of Fame Museum, which is in Titusville, which is not a Kennedy Space Center, is the town right next to Kennedy Space Center. And it's a very unfortunate thing. We didn't even know about it when we went on our tour. But I got a funny feeling maybe that's why we couldn't get any closer. And then, of course, the Columbia was launched. It was terrific. It launches up. What a wonderful launch. Everything went great. And then it gets into space and it's got missing tiles. Oh, my Lord. If I wasn't anxious and nervous enough, we saw the missing tiles. We thought, oh, my God, is it going to survive the landing? And of course, it did survive the landing. And they were great. And it was great. And they did a lot of things. Okay, that was my 1981 tour. For those of you who are still awake, in 1998, I went on another kind of quasi-private tour where we got to go in that Air Force section to launch control that was used in the 1950s for the unmanned Mercury launches. It's called the blockhouse. And they have these state-of-the-art computers here. Actually, this computer here was only used for one thing, to monitor the flight and to blow it up if it looked like it was going to land somewhere where it shouldn't. Okay. And what did they have? They had this movie going on, this repeating video on this computer that shows one of those early unmanned Mercury launches being destructed by the self-destruct system. Okay. And I thought that was a strange thing to have at Kennedy, but they wanted to be realistic, I guess. And there on the left are the state-of-the-art computers. These tape drives are not magnetic tape. They are punched paper tape, which was huge in the 1950s. You see the countdown clocks, right? And then in the lower right, you see what passes for computers in the 1950s. Nowadays, when you have a computer, you write a program for that computer, which is electronic, code, computer code. It's all electronic, digital. It goes in the computer and it runs the computer. You want to change what the computer does? You change the program. In the 1950s, you had these things. You had these pegboards with these wires that you could move from one hole to another. If you wanted to change what the computer did, you pulled the peg out of one hole and you put it in another hole. I learned this stuff when I started my computer classes in the 1960s. And I saw big companies in Chicago in the 1980s still using this technology, believe it or not, right? Anyway, so this is what the 50s launch control was like. They had models of all these vehicles in there, a heat shield, a model of the Explorer 1, America's first satellite. Here's the capsule that the monkeys went up before we sent up human astronauts, okay? As early as the 1940s, we were sending monkeys up in rockets. So that was in that early. Then in 2012, I got the announcement was made that they're letting people go in the VAB. So it's huge. As it says on the left, you put a Saturn V on the mobile launch pad there, and it still has 85 feet of headroom, 526 feet high. It's huge. So I got to go inside, and I took some pictures. I'll show you some videos later, but the pictures really don't capture it. It's everything. It's so big you can't get it in a picture. All the cranes are the yellow again, like we saw before. Look at this crane. It says 325 tons. The other one says 50 tons. The black thing in the lower right, that's the Odyssey capsule that's on top of the SLS rocket right now. It was in the VAB getting prepped, I guess, or whatever, when we were there. And so it's just so huge, it's a joke. And this is how they used it right here. Here's these big cranes lifting up the first stage of a Saturn V. On the right, we see it lifting up the space shuttle orbiter. And this is the way they did things in the vehicle assembly building, because they had to put the tank and the SRBs and the orbiter, they had to put them together like Tinker Toys. Okay. And this is what they do every day before breakfast in that place. It's absolutely amazing. Okay. So we got to go inside, and it turned out that while I was in there, the actual Space Shuttle Endeavour was in there also. And so we got to walk right up to it and see it close up. And they were prepping it for its movement on a 747 to California, where it sits near Los Angeles, because Rocketdyne is the company that really put together the space shuttles in the beginning. So they have a museum there, and one of the space shuttles are there. One of them are here in Houston. One of them is Kennedy Space. Wait a minute. Do we have one here at Houston? Yes. Do we? Yes, we do. One of them's at Kennedy Space Center. Yeah, there were three of them. Right. Okay. But so you can see. And then I'm only going to mention that in the 1990s, I took my 10-year-old son to space camp. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. 1/6 gravity simulators, total space shuttle, mission simulations, about 3 days. Fantastic. They turn you upside down and backwards to make you throw up. It was a barrel of laughs. So, they don't do that at Kennedy anymore. But you can go to Huntsville, Alabama. My grandson is going there this summer. I highly recommend it if you got young kids. It's an absolute blast. And then here's a few other new things. This is a memorial to all the astronauts who died while they were working. Okay. And it's this huge black slab, for lack of another word, with all the names of the astronauts by mission. They're separated by the mission that they were on, and they're actually carved all the way through this black surface. And on the left, you can see how all the names are lit up from behind. So at night, it's really an amazing memorial to all those astronauts. You see the plaque in the lower right, which so it shows all the pictures of the astronauts that are in the memorial. Obviously, you have the Challenger crew, the Columbia crew, the Apollo 1 crew, and then many other astronauts who all perished in plane crashes and those kind of accidents while they were doing an astronaut training. And then, if you've been watching the newspapers, does anybody get the newspaper anymore? Just the other day, here we had the SLS on the mobile launch pad, on the crawler. It was out at the launch pad 39. They did a big countdown test. Took them a couple of weeks to do it. And it has now been shipped via the crawler back into the vehicle assembly building, where they're going to fix the problems that they found during the countdown test. And so, it's all this stuff is still being used today. This is a launch viewing gantry. If you're going to go to Kennedy Space Center for a launch, it's kind of close to the launch pad, not too close, but you're closer than the vehicle assembly building. And you can go way up high so you get a good view. And when I was at space camp with my son, the space shuttle was landing that day on the space shuttle landing strip. We were up on the top level there, and they kept telling us on a radio, oh, it's any minute now, any minute now. Here it comes, here it comes, here it comes. And then we saw the space shuttle come down. We were kind of far away. Again, this is made to watch launches, not landings. So it's kind of far away from the landing strip. But I actually saw the space shuttle come down for a couple of seconds before it hit the landing strip. And so, but if you're going to go there for a launch, they got this tower or gantry, whatever you call it, and that's something you might want to do. Here is the Space Shuttle Atlantis that's at Kennedy Space Center, and you can go, walk right up to it. And they just announced a few days ago, one of the Space Shuttle launch directors, I forget his name, will take you on a tour. You go with him. It costs extra money, of course. And he takes you right up to the space shuttle, and I'm sure he talks about the experience and the shuttle itself, and that's at Kennedy. And of course, here in Houston, we have this model of the space shuttle and the external tank and the solid rocket boosters on the bottom. And what's nice about this model of the space shuttle is you go up the stairs here and you can actually go inside the space shuttle, which I did a couple of times. And this is here in town. And so you get to go see the flight deck and the mid deck. You see this payload bay. It's really nice. Anyway, remember I showed you at Kennedy Space Center, they've got the Saturn V in a big museum. This is this is in that museum, and on the left here, this is the lunar module, a model, a simulator, and you get to see right up close what it looks like. And when I saw that, I said, "There's no chairs." Neil and Buzz had to stand up the whole time they were in a lunar module, and I didn't know that. So when they were landing and, they were working their joysticks, they were standing up looking out those triangular windows. And then here is Mission Control in Houston, which they, within the last year or two, they totally refurbished it. Matter of fact, maybe 3 years ago, they had a big program. They were taking donations, and they've got it looking just like it did in 1960. And I went on an old NASA old timer took me inside there. And when I was a volunteer at Johnson Space Center, and we sat down on a chair at one of those consoles, and he said, "I used to work right here, right at this console." Okay. And he said, "I was sitting in this chair right at this console," and he pointed to a little speaker. It's about 5 inches around that was in the console. And he said, "And out of that speaker, I heard the following words. I heard, 'Houston, we have a problem.'" Okay, that of course was the beginning of Apollo 13, et cetera. And so, okay, I'm getting a little emotional just remembering that he told me that, and I wasn't even there when it happened. But anyway, so this is you can take tours, special tours that you can go in this mission control. And here's what Launch Pad 39 looks like now. As you saw with the SLS, now every rocket has its own gantry on the mobile launch pad. There's no permanent gantry like we had for the Space Shuttle and the Saturn V at the launch pad. It just started to rain here. So all the gantries are gone, and all that's left is the water tower on the right, which is what they flood the launch pad with just before the engines light. And then those 3 giant towers with lightning rods on them, because every rocket that's going to be launched there is going to have its own gantry. Okay. That's all I wanted to show you, almost. For all of you who are still awake and still online, God bless you and thank you. Now, Debbie, if I still have time, I got 3 minutes of video. Is that still possible?
Yes, you do. So I think you have to stop the share and then start over with the video.
Stop share, hit the share screen, point to my video. I have the sound turned up, and I hit the share again. Is my screen filling with the guy in the blue shirt on the left?
Yes.
Is it filling the screen?
It is.
Okay. It's 3 minutes long. It's 2 things. The movies I took inside the vehicle assembly building, and then when I was right next to the crawler, when it was driving down the road, I stayed out of the way. I didn't want it to go over my toes. You know what I mean? And that's all. It's just 3 minutes. And there's some talking on it, and I'll try to narrate too. And here we go.
Yeah, they were moving on.
In the background, you can see the back shell. I'm just panning up.
Finally.
Watch where you're going, guys.
Yes, it's big.
It's big.
Actress twisted her ankle the other day.
I was kind of in awe of the size of the place.
They bring the pieces of the rocket in either through the door here on the north or the door down
Again,
to the south.
when you take pictures, it's hard to get a feel for the size.
Those parts of rock here in the middle, this is called the transfer file. This picture I'm standing in front of here, this white first stage, it says United States in red. This is not the Saturn V blue rocket. This is a smaller rocket called the Saturn 1B. When we launched the Saturn V, it was the biggest one.
And there's the Space Shuttle Endeavour.
Now these pictures here show us what happens after we get through that diaphragm inside the
The black stuff is shimmering because it's a thin plastic to protect the tiles temporarily.
we went around to the back, you would see that the space shuttle main engines are missing because they're going to be used for that new space launch system.
So again, it's being prepared for its trip to California.
The engines on the back will be stationed on it, but don't tell anybody. Now let me tell you a little bit more about Endeavour. This is the youngest of the orbiters. It was approved by Congress in 1987 to replace Challenger.
So next, well, then here's the close-up of that shell that goes over the engine. And here's the, we're headed towards the pad from the VAB. It just so happened the crawler was going down the road.
They're carrying a rocket out to the launch pad. It goes much more slowly, typically about 6 to 8 miles an hour. So right now they're probably doing.
You can see the motor spinning and the treads moving. We're in a bus at this point. Now we're in the right-hand lane, so we won't be underneath the mobile launch pad. But on the way back, we actually go right underneath it.
I gotta get me one of these.
Better move, buddy. You're going to get run over in about another 10 minutes.
See, that guy is walking in between them.
Oh, I don't believe this.
You left it in the dust, Wendell.
And it was pure luck that we were able to be there when it was cruising on down the road. And you can see the tracks it left in the gravel roadway.
When it came by about a month ago. Now the door.
And now here's on the way back. We're now on the right hand, in the other lane, which means we're going to be right underneath the mobile launch pad.
Going right underneath it. Half of the bus.
You got to keep your head
The right
low.
side will be underneath the platform. I hope he wasn't out drinking late last night. Might roll it on the curb.
Wow. 33 is fast. Break your break.
Okay. And I don't believe my timing. It just started a thunderstorm here and I didn't lose power or internet. So boy, that was great. Thank you very much. That's all I got. I'm certainly available for questions, but thank you very much for your staying and your attention. And I hope you learned something new out of there. I certainly had a great time at KSC. And Debbie, I'm ready for questions if there are any.
Yeah, thanks for taking us with you. Let me see if there's anything. I think it's just, we do have, hold on. You see that this is from in the, well, we have some comments in the chat. Daniel, did you want to say anything? Otherwise, anyone wants to go ahead and unmute.
My video just started again. I apologize.
We're not hearing it. It's okay. It's not being shared.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yes, go ahead.
Did you ever get in any trouble with anything you did?
Trouble. Like I said, I have a very good attorney. No, I didn't get in any trouble, which, you know what, is a rarity for my travels. My parents just wanted me to stay out of prison. That was the goal.
The one time I went to KSC, but we thought we would drive as close as we could to see the shuttle, which was right there, going to get launched the next day.
Sure.
And we're just driving down the road towards it. We said, let's see what happens. And we hit a roadblock, and they go, no, with the shuttle there, you can't go past this point. Yeah. Okay. So then we went back, and then here's some dirt roads to go out into a wildlife area. So we were driving around in this wildlife area and looking at all the birds and all. And then a helicopter comes and lowers right in front of our car. And people with guns are there going turn around.
How was the, Joe, how was the prison food? Was it good?
Well, anyway, so they directed us back towards the main road. We got to the main road. We drove away, and then we got to the roadblock from the other side. And they're like, wait a minute. How did you get past us? And we go we were just looking at birds.
The closest thing I got to trouble, I guess, is when the guy in the camouflage with his machine gun just wanted to see my ID. And then I was okay after that. So no trouble.
People in a helicopter with machine guns hovering right in front of our rental car.
Sure.
Pointing at us. Okay.
No extra charge for that, Joe.
Yeah, it was exciting.
Yes, of course.
I had the opposite. I had the opposite experience when I went to Johnson, visiting the Saturn V on its side. I went through the gate and they say, oh, I'm sorry, guys, I no longer work for NASA. I don't have a badge. And so that's no problem. Just park there. I could not believe it. I mean, you can get on Johnson by foot and nobody will shoot at you. So anyway, thank you for your enthusiasm about shuttle. I too was very excited by it. Of course, I was devastated when Challenger exploded. And
Yeah.
I wonder if you're as excited about SLS as you and I have been about shuttle. What do you think about SLS?
Well, you know, you said you're not that excited with SLS. I could understand that completely. You know, us folks who have been around a while have been kind of jaded. You know, you got Alan Shepard, you got the John Glenn, you got the landed on the moon. How many times have we been on the moon? I forgot, I lost track, a whole bunch. And then we saw the space shuttle for 30 years. Okay, we've kind of seen it all. Now, I think if the SLS is extremely successful, I have every reason to believe it will be. We're going to see some amazing things. And I think there's a lot of potential there for excitement, a lot of potential for excitement. So I would say fasten your seatbelt. It might get good.
I know there's a generation. I was talking to, I think it was Daniel Rolick at Texas Star Party. It's like it's their turn to see someone go to the moon. He's waiting for that to happen.
Yes, we had our shot. Let's face it. I mean, you know, we had close calls and some big problems, and but we had our time. I am very thankful that I was around to witness all that.
I always thought it was a shame we went before there was high definition television.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah. Oh, when I saw the Alan Shepard rocket take off on a screen that was probably the size of my computer screen I'm looking at right now, it was just amazing, you know, and nowadays that would be disappointing, I suppose.
Well, nowadays we'll have the holodeck when it gets up there again.
There you go. Yes, yes.
Any other questions or comments? Well, I sure enjoyed that talk. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, what can you do with like the new private launches? Is there any, can you go like watch a SpaceX launch? How do you do it?
You mean now?
Yeah.
How do I do it? You get on the SpaceX.com and they'll have a video and they'll show you the launch. They start at about 2 hours before zero.
In person.
Oh, I haven't been there for SpaceX. I did see a space shuttle launch once in the 90s. I haven't seen SpaceX. You know, you hear the part where I was born in 1950? You know, I have some enthusiasm left. I have some energy, but I also have 3 grandchildren living right down the street, and they keep me busy. So I haven't. And you know, here's a problem. Launches are fantastic, right? Even if you see them on TV. But I went to one launch, took me a couple days to go there to stay overnight, to find a spot. And then with 30 seconds left, they scrubbed it. You gotta be a tough guy and be ready to say, okay, I'm not seeing it today. I'll come back another day, or I'll stay another day. Hope they'll do it in a day or two. And so, you know, that's an issue. Yeah,
when I saw Atlantis launch, all the people around me were like, this is our 3rd try.
There you go.
It didn't go.
It ain't easy.
Sort of annoyed that my first try I actually got to see a launch.
You might recall April 12 is when the Columbia went up the first time, but it was scheduled to go about 3-4 days before that. And with about 30 seconds left, there was a computer glitch or something. And then I had to wait. I was nervous as heck for several days. Yeah. That's just the space business. You got to be ready for the delays.
So that is a good question, whether they're having public viewing of SpaceX launches or any other launches they're doing at Kennedy Space Center, because they still do that.
Oh, sure.
From Florida who can get there at the last minute, or they.
Yeah.
I got to see 2 shuttle launches because my cousin who works at NASA invited me, and it's like a solar eclipse. It's very different in person.
Yes.
It's actually much more physically beautiful than anything I've seen on television.
Oh, sure, sure,
And of
sure.
course you feel it and hear it. But
Yeah, you feel it. I was when I saw my shuttle launch, I was far away and I could feel it. And so if you're close, yikes, it had to be really something.
yeah, so I do recommend if someone can, especially with now that we're launching bigger things, if they are having public viewing, to try it at some point.
And make sure to look at the actual launch and not the screen, because when I went, the whole crowd was going like 10, 9, 8.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
most of us looking at the actual thing, we're like, it's already in the air. No, look away from the screen. You're missing it. No, no, no.
Oh, hey, I got a story I can tell you. I went there for a launch. I'm sitting on the shore of the Banana River, and there's dolphins and there's reporters and there's lots of people and TV cameras and celebrities. And so I'm taking videos of them, right? And so now the launch 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, and the space shuttle goes up, and I'm taking a video of it when it's going up. And after about 15, 20 seconds, my battery died in my camera. I got the first 15 or 20 seconds of the launch, and I wanted to take that camera and throw it right in the Banana River. Okay, I did not, but the thought went through my mind. So I got the launch, okay, and I watched it the other day. But I probably could have had another minute before it disappeared in the clouds. But that. Also, one other quick story. 1981, I go on that tour. I come back to Chicago. Adler Planetarium wants me to give a presentation. They have a huge theater there. It's probably 3, 4, 500 people in this theater. So I said, sure. So my daughter was only about a year and a half old at the time. So my wife held my daughter at the back of the theater in case she started crying for whatever reason, so she could leave the theater, right? So it's my turn. I go up on the stage, this huge stage with a huge like movie theater screen behind me. And they bring up my first screen. I start my presentation. My daughter is all the way in the back of this huge theater. And as soon as she hears me start to talking, she starts screaming, "Daddy, daddy, daddy, daddy." The crowd loved it. They were cracking up. All right. It wasn't how I wanted to start my presentation, but my wife had to take her out of the theater. She wouldn't stop. And so my wife is in the presentation, but she's never seen this presentation. So there you go. That's the way it goes.
So that was a great talk, Bill. Thanks. Every time you do one of these, I feel like we're with you. The videos are really helpful. It gives a lot of presence. And
oh, I assure you, this is the highlights. There was a ton of stuff that I'd love to show you, and a ton of more video, but I knew that there was a limit. You all need a drink of water by now. There was a limit to what we can do. And so I had to, believe it or not, this is this short version.
You should make like a YouTube video, like someplace where this will be archived for posterity. I mean, you've got a lot of interesting of shots of things that are probably pretty rare.
Some, yeah. Well, Debbie, correct me if I'm wrong. This is going on YouTube, and in a couple of days, it'll be available for posterity, won't it?
Yeah. Right. So Joe Califf will edit this, and none of the good stuff, just things like getting the slides started. And
I give you full editorial rights.
Right. We have a YouTube channel, so all of our talks go there. So you're getting quite a library now. I believe most of these have been recorded.
Yeah. So Joe, you can watch it on YouTube again and again and again as many times as you want.
No, especially the one where you like met the shoemakers and stuff. I mean, that's really historically valuable.
Yeah, well, that was a good time. Yeah. Is that on YouTube? Is that on YouTube? I think it is. Well, yeah.
If it's not, you should make sure that gets archived somewhere.
Oh, you know what? I don't think my presentation's on YouTube, but my videos that I took interviewing them, Google my name and Palomar, and you'll see the videos of me interviewing shoemakers and David Levy.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Cool.
No charge. No charge for you, Joe. Friends and family discount.
So thanks again, Bill. It was wonderful.
My pleasure.
So glad to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So everybody, thank you very
much. Listen, my thanks goes out for all the people that stayed. Thanks for staying around.
Well, you always hold our interest, so
No, thank you.
I didn't
My
see
pleasure.
I did not see the numbers drop until maybe just now. Definitely not during your talk.
Okay, that's
They
okay.
held
I
steady.
understand.
So everybody, thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.